So welcome to the Portland FileMaker Meetup. Our speaker is John Renfrew. For the beginning, as I said a minute ago, if we could just turn on video for the first part and just say hey to each other so we can see each other's face and see who's grown a beard since we see them last. Darren, I didn't even recognize you. And then I'm pretty excited. I guess someone else is letting people into the meetings, aren't they? David, are you doing that?
Not me.
Oh, I don't see anybody in the waiting room, so I think they're just coming straight in, which is great. So John has some pretty fascinating stuff and quite a bit of content to cover. So I'm going to let him dive right in and take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Obviously, the standing joke is that the presentation is delivered in the English language, not the one that most of you have come to know and love. But if I speak too fast, Matt has permission to just kind of stop and slow down or interpret if necessary. So I'm going to dive straight in and share a screen with you. Let me go to there. So in general, want to just spend some time looking at logging in FileMaker, but one specific branch of it with a subtext of, can the data API be any help to us? So first of all, what is it that we might want to log in FileMaker? Data changes. We could now log schema changes on an everyday basis because we have some tools to be able to look back at historic schema. We might want to be logging when users access a file, what they're doing within the file, navigation, things like that. We might want to be logging the results or the payloads of various, talking to a script or talking to an external API. We might want to log errors. Specifically, we're going to look as well at logging successes. And we might want to be logging things like a machine details or state. So where is the user right now and what is the context of what they've got running? Is everything okay? And that's all fairly obvious what we might want to log. And there are a load of reasons why we might want to log things. So the most obvious is that it always comes up is, well, we want to audit something. We want to go back and look at what happened when somebody has changed a field. We might want to use logging for the purposes of rollback to be able to see a number of changes and go back to a previous state. We may have requirements to log for the purpose of compliance or other internal policies. We almost certainly, as good developers, want to be logging for the reason of troubleshooting, being able to apply a fix when we know something went wrong. Logging for the sake of performance, being able to work out how long everything takes. If you change a script, whether or not it actually makes any difference to whether or not the whole system runs faster or not. Definitely, we want to consider logging when something happens on the server, perform script on server, because it has no UI to tell us that something did or did not happen. We might be logging what a user is, what a senior manager is searching for, so that we can provide some business intelligence tools saying, oh, here, I notice you're always searching for this. Here's a report we could do. And we may just want to be logging things because we want to spy on what people are doing, to be honest. And the when of logging, one of the main ones obviously is around data commit time. So that may be on entry or on edit of some data, but almost certainly on commit of data. We might want to be logging when somebody goes to a record, so when a record loads. We might want to be logging various things through navigation, whether that's from schema or from various buttons. We can log from inside scripts multiple times, but we may also want to log actions that are happening on our files from external gateways, both XML, PHP kind of gateways. So it may be that somebody has a web application or a modern kind of flow application like Claris Connect or Zapier or whatever, and something that they're doing there, we want to log that within FileMaker. Some of the very basic, simple ways that we do logging, if it's field level logging, something like a custom function, many people have at one time or another hesitate to posit that we've all had to play with ultralog at some point from Ray Colligan, a custom function which logs data in a table based on which fields you want to log. And when you change something, it adds it at the bottom of a list in a field. Obviously, AppWorks themselves have their own FM log, which I've played with as well, where what Matt has kind of done is go, here's a thing where you can show what a user is doing. They went here, they looked at this, they edited this, they did that. For those who are not fully aware, there's a brand new kid on the block from Daniel Woods at Data Fusion in New Zealand called Elemental Log, where he's tried to kind of provide a replacement for ultralog as a custom function, but mix it with a method of using JSON to store the data about changes in a record, but also give you a viewer file as well. There's a free download. If you go to their website, there's a free download that you can play with. They just came out before Christmas. There's the set error logging script step within a script where you can turn this on, and any errors that happen in a script, it will write to a file in your users folder. Skeleton Key have a great example sample file. A couple of other people have written blogs on it. DB Services is one. I can't remember what the other one was. But what that does is that adds data. Every time an error happens, it adds a line to this log, but you can also add your own data to the end of it. And that skeleton key sample is very interesting because it adds an FMP URL to the end, so you can jump to the record that caused the problem. And then there's a very kind of esoteric way of doing a log by adding something to the system logs, which are on the server. Honza wrote a great blog post about doing that. That's the URL to it, so that you can all go and look at it later. But you can force something to be written to a system log. So there are multiple ways to consider how logging might happen, depending on your context. And obviously the context of logging is always set by the demands that our customers place on us for their files. I had to focus more on action logging around error and success than talking anything about doing kind of field audit logging, although I've got one little example to show on that. And obviously the question is, what kinds of things do we think we want to log? And the first thing we'd say is, well, we want to log errors. If something happens in a script and it generates a FileMaker error number, error code, we want to log that on the basis that that wasn't supposed to happen. And I want to at least record that so I can go and look at it later. But we also have to consider what the and then what question is for that. So just logging an error, the question is, well, what are you going to do with that? Why are you logging the errors, and how are you going to consider what you do with it? But there are some other opposite side of the coin, as it were, things that we might fit in the box of success logging. So if we have something that does a massive loop, we just want to maybe record at the end of every loop that this worked successfully, and it was supposed to happen 117 times, and it really did happen 117 times. And this is what happens in the middle. It's very difficult to troubleshoot something like that when it's a large loop, because working through it manually will almost certainly take you longer to do than to make a log happen and then just review the log afterwards. So similarly, very long or complex scripts, being able to just fire them off, but have something that logs in the middle can help you just see that everything is going as you're expecting it and or not. The second you stop using the client to send emails and you start using either FileMaker's internal script steps or a plugin, you not only want to know that an email didn't send, there's a very good reason perhaps to record an email that was sent successfully and what the content was. Look at a specific use case on that. Based on some work I did for somebody, they wanted to record every time a file was added to a couple of particular tables because they were all versioned. So the only reason you would add a new version of the file was because it was now V2 or V3. They wanted to log that that had happened and who did it and when and why, because they were in quite a controlled environment. And while it doesn't specifically affect you, our data protection legislation in the UK and Europe has led us to consider what kind of actions we need to record in our logs around things where there is a more general data provision for us to consider. Really good example, if you look at emails, there are certain specific 1505, 1506 errors, which happen occasionally for no good reason at all, other than that the internet is having a bad day. They can appear to be very random. Office 365 has suddenly gone down for 20 seconds and it doesn't work, or you change the Gmail password and you forgot to put it in the script. And those need logging as well as the successes. We don't always know why it's happened, but you certainly need to know that an email you thought had been sent did or did not get sent, and what the failure was. OS updates, particularly if you're on Windows, can, it has been known to break things on occasion, shall we say. So just knowing that your script that you thought worked last week is still working, and having somebody being able to check that is a very good thing. But on the opposite side of that, a question that I've come to a lot in terms of success logging, if you have something that happens at 5 o'clock on a Monday morning that sends out a report to all the managers in the company, I had one that at 5 o'clock on a Monday worked out the timesheets for 250 employees based on their last week's log-on data that came from a MySQL table, parceled it up into a PDF and sent a zip of all of those PDFs to the finance department so they could spend Monday working out how much these people were owed so they could be paid on a Thursday. The question is, can you, if there is some kind of failure, either a failure in sending or a failure in receiving, their inbox is down at the time that they should have got it, it wasn't working, you got a bounce back. Can you resend the whole of that email without rerunning a report that was attached to it? Because if you send off a report at 5 o'clock on a Monday and then somebody asks you at midday on the Monday, oh, we didn't get that email, could you resend it to us? And you rerun the report, there is every possibility that it's no longer accurate because the data has now changed because you've been at work for 5 hours. So using a log file to store that information can be really helpful in that specific context. In terms of GDPR, for us, we have things like you might have in kind of HIPAA compliant things. Who looked at some records? Do they have permission to look at the record? Even if they're a senior manager or the managing director of a company, they're not in HR. The question is, they have permission to look at the records, but should they be looking at the records, and who are they looking at? If an employee or some contact of yours changes one of their preferences, like, no, I don't want you to send me marketing emails anymore, for instance. Have you logged that successfully? Do you know when it was done? Who did it? So that if you make a mistake further down the line, you can look back and go, no, we did change that. That's our mistake or something. in terms of with somebody I worked with, they have stored people's travel documents because they are booking flights and things for them. You want to record who took a copy of somebody else's documents and what was the reason they took it. It's okay to do that, but we just want to log who's doing it, and therefore make sure that every couple of months you can remind them that if there's any documents they've got still sitting in their My Documents folder, they need to be deleted. And a big one for us is around record deletion. Because of this thing called the right to be forgotten, I can write to you and say, please, could you remove all of my personal details from your database? So I need to know which records had your personal details on them. I can either remove the record or I can turn your name into Mr. A person or Ms. A person. But what happens when you do a restore from a backup? And you actually have restored some data that in the meantime you should have or have deleted or anonymized. Have you got a way of being able to say, okay, I've now restored the backup, but can I now apply the data from this file that can go through and find these records with these unique IDs in these tables and reapply that either deletion or anonymization? And obviously it's a very specific use case, but a log file would really, I think, be the only way to kind of manage that, because it can be reapplied and reapplied. You know, if you restore from a backup and it doesn't quite work and you have to do it again, well, you still have to reapply all the subsequent changes. So enough words, let's look at a couple of pictures. When we start logging, it's quite a simple thing, isn't it? We're working in the basis of a file. We've got one or more tables with a load of fields in there, and we just add another table, which is our log table, to that. And we could be using either scripts or triggers to make the log happen. There are some issues that we need to have considered how we do, so it's not intrusive to the user. So obviously, early days, the use of off-screen windows. Card windows have kind of made that magic for us. We don't have any other way of doing it, so because we can't write a record to a log table using SQL, because we can only read with execute SQL, without kind of going through massive hoops. And the whole process is synchronous. So the act of writing something to the log table is in the middle of whatever you're doing. So if a user clicks a button, something goes wrong, you have to go to the log table and write the record and come back. That obviously slows down the whole process, and it may visually interfere with what the user's seeing, depending on how long that takes. And obviously, the second we move to any kind of multi-file system, whether that's, you know, separate whole pieces of work within one company, the question is, where does a log sit? Because if it's in the one, you have local, there are reasons for having some local logging, but stuff around general performance, particularly some of the bits I want to look at, you're going to end up with a third file, which is which is your log file. You still have scripts and triggers, which are generating the things you want to log, but now you also have to manage something, an extra load in the middle, which is all the relationships, the permissions, how all the scripts work, not just in the source file, but in the log file too. And the second you've opened that log file, there's issues about managing whether it stays hidden or not for people. So as soon as you've run a script in the other file, it opens automatically. It's there. It may or may not be on the screen. It may or may not be what you really want the user to see. And it stays open because once you've got the reference to it, you can't close it because it just won't close because it just goes hidden then. So it's still there. But obviously we could now, if we're doing this in a hosted environment, we could potentially look at how PSOS, perform script on server, might help us with the task of doing that. So we kind of divert it somewhere else. But that has its own things that we have to manage in terms of whether that's a reasonable thing to assume and It's not quite as fast on some, it is it's faster to do the logging, but there's the overhead of opening the file and running the script. But we could make it asynchronous at that point. It's about the only place we could go off and do that, and then, hey, I don't care about the result. Thank you very much. I imagine that's, you know, many of us have dealt with the kind of issues that that are around that. So my little journey that I want to kind of look at specifically started by Dan Smith, who some of you will know, wrote a great module on modularfilemaker.org that did logging, and he looked at 5 levels of the things you might want to log. If you go and look up siflog in Wikipedia, originally that has 8 levels of logging, which are vaguely standard. He kind of went, look, here's 5 ways of considering the kinds of level of things you might want to log. From a number 1 being, this is a crisis, to at the other end of 5 being, this is essentially inconsequential, but I do want to log it, and it's a very, and the amount of data that you're logging reduces as you go up the, down the severity scale or up the number scale, should we say. And that involved creating a JSON packet of information about whatever you wanted to log, including some system variables, system environment variables. And that's what you were going to record as the log package. And he had a custom function, there were various custom functions, because it was before FileMaker had JSON functions natively. Use some custom functions to create that. And the questions that you were trying to record was, who was doing what, where, when, what were we expecting, what actually happened, and what were the error codes that got generated at the time. So that block of information might enable you to unpick what might have gone wrong. So that was what, 2015, so 6 years ago. There's then a question for me about, so what happens as a result of logging something in your system that may have gone wrong / been a success? And obviously, something where you're logging a minimal amount of data, a loop happened and this was the result. There's no real need to do anything afterwards. It's not until you get to the middle, the kind of base level of logging, when the FileMaker error codes should be what you as a developer would be able to, that's your starting point. So if you've logged what the error codes are, you can go, oh, that was a 960 error. Okay, what was that? Okay, it's this thing. A 3 error, like I say, a 1506 is a well-known email error. And the error codes contained in there and the information that's in there should be able to kind of work out. But after that, if you've got a level 2 thing, this is something you consider is serious enough to notify other people. And a 1 is at the level of, this is so serious that even if it happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody's getting notified in such a way that you get out of bed and start dealing with it. It's actually something which in a 24-hour business is critical enough to want to fix it.
And I love it. You're making it FileMaker compatible. It stops at level 1. There is no level 0.
Yeah.
I just read that. I posted the Wikipedia article, which of course has a level 0, which is the critical, you know, the highest level. Anyway, that cracked me up.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. And obviously the kind of methods we might use to do that communication. I'm a big fan of Prowl because I have Prowl clients on my iPad, on my phone. I have various things where something goes wrong. I get notified before the customer phones me to say something has gone wrong. I already know what the thing gone wrong is. Things now like Slack, obviously SMS, email, phone, or and preferably maybe all of the above. But obviously one of the things to consider is that the thing that may have caused the crisis is that the electricity or the internet is no longer working. So how do you consider some level of notification of a serious system failure when the system failure won't allow you to do the notification in the way? So that for your company, does that involve buying an SMS backup with a SIM card in it? so you could at least send an SMS out because it's being run on a UPS. That obviously depends on the disaster recovery. But the thing that you get sent could potentially be containing an FMP URL that would take you as a developer straight to the record in the error log that told you what had just caused that. So we have a way of making that as interactive as we can. We want to get in straight away and go, right, okay, I can see what's happened, or let me investigate. I do at least know what's going on. I have some information. So the hook after the log for me was a kind of interesting addition to that, really, and kind of what I wanted to do. And obviously the development over the last couple of years, once we got JSON functions natively, I rewrote all of the custom functions in that file to use the FileMaker versions of it, and tweaked myself what was being reported, and developed that into I did a piece of work with a customer. Well, what we ended up with was not just having one error log, but in the one file, we had a table for errors, a table for emails, a table for files, and a table for GDPR related activities. So it was a very similar process to push the error / success, but you just had to direct it to the right table. And essentially it was the same kind of payload. So it made it easier to expand that. And I will show you something where we can also be passing files as part of that logging. But there's a bit of trickery to making that happen, as you might expect. So that's why we've all kind of want to see some of that. I then looked at, well, hey, do card windows help us? Obviously, I've been a big fan of card windows ever since they came out. It's one of the things I spoke about at DevCon, written a few articles about how to have a whole man in the middle thing where you can use another file that isn't really connected to use the card window as your interface rather than anything else, because there are some clever things you can do with that. There is still, however, just as much to manage. And in particular, you can set up dynamically now the relationship between this file and the log file that you want at runtime, but you don't have a way to change where it's logged without closing the file down and then resetting where that link is pointing to. And it has all of the other issues about whether it's being synchronous. Card windows don't work with perform script on server because the windows don't exist. So it's not a perfect kind of solution, although it may be slicker and faster. And obviously, in terms of just looking at the process, perform script on server always seems like a great thing, but there is the load for every single user session. Every time you start a perform script on server, it's like a brand new user logging in and takes up that level of resources within the server. And certainly if you're logging something frequently and every time you do it, you push off a perform script on server, there's every chance you're going to kill the server at some point pretty soon in terms of just killing the performance for everybody else. And the downside is that if you want to make it asynchronous, you don't know whether it worked. You don't know whether it even worked or not. You don't have any feedback as to whether what you've just done works. And obviously it's no good when you're particularly error logging if you don't know that it didn't work. Kind of lots of double negatives there. And obviously the things about card windows, yes, you have to build the relationship with like a $double variable, but that can't be changed. But it can be invisible to the user. It can be very, very slick, so you don't get any interference for users. So question, which is a kind of, let's just think for a second, what are all the ways that we can create a new record in FileMaker? So obviously we can do it using a menu, Command N, Apple N, whatever it is, create a new record. We can use script steps to create new records. We could use some form of magic portal where you're setting something through a relationship to a portal to create a record in the third place. You can obviously create records by having a file that is imported somewhere else to create a record. A level of complexity above, using ODBC or JDBC as our connection into the third file. We've had things like custom web publishing XML gateway, but that's got to cross through it because it is on the way out, shall we say? And we all know that that's kind of on the way out, so that may not work. And obviously, we could do it via SQL, but that then that involves, that would work via a plugin, but that's another level of dependency that we then have to manage for the user, and what happens if that isn't working and doesn't it work. So beyond all the kind of obvious ones, we do now have a new way of creating a record in the FileMaker environment on the server, and that's using the data API. So the question is, what does the data API add to this picture? Well, immediately what we have done is separate the log file from the source files. We no longer have to manage relationships. We don't even have to manage permissions between the source file and the log file, because that's handled by a user permission within the log file and a privilege set. We've still got some scripts to manage potentially. The file, as far as we're concerned, is no longer open or closed. It's just on the server. So we've removed some of those issues about having stray files hanging around or not being able to close them. And we may or may not have dealt with the issue of whether or not the process can be synchronous or asynchronous. But we do need to manage some stuff around username and passwords. And the question is always going to be, as we look at it, what about speed, and what, how does that add to the picture, or is it the same, or is it worse? Because the data API is not just about pulling data from another file. It's not just about a new way to read data from a third file. It can definitely push. So we have the create record method. So I can send to an endpoint using create record some field data, and that will create a record in the file. But there are also, like there were in the XML gateway, a script that can run pre the request, and a script that can run before any sorting is done. So we have the ability to create records and also run some scripts around at the same time. That is obviously synchronous, because we get a result back from the data API. So we can create a record, but before we create the record, we can run a script to make sure we're in the right place and we've done some tidying up, and we can get back an answer. We are fixed to layouts when we use this, because the whole of the data API is based on a file and a layout. So there maybe is a bit of work to do there to generate the right layouts for us to use this in, but we can definitely now create a record in a third file that is not linked to this file. Therefore, it could be on a completely different server on the other side of the country. It doesn't have to be on my server anymore locally. So we can also create a record by using a script. You can run the script directly. So we can either use the create record method, or we can just run a script and send a parameter to it. Because it's URL based, there is a limiter of 30,000 characters in that URL. And so the question is, what happens if the amount of data we want to send is more than 30,000 characters? And if we ever think it's going to get near that, we have to consider that and never say, oh yeah, it's only going to be like tiny. It's not a problem. But the script that we run when triggered by the API, the data API, can itself run another script. So we suddenly have a small entry point into, like a perform script on server scenario. I'm asking a script in a file to do something, but that in itself can run some other scripts. So based on the information I send, it can take that and go off to a layout and do a find and do a create and do several other things and come back to where I am to pass the result, which gives me a semi-asynchronous. I can do a lot of other things while this is happening if I'm kind of smart about how that works. So we can create by pushing. There's a limit of 30,000 characters. That script can run another script. So that's the kind of format of how that request might work. Fill in your variables in the middle. Host /FMI data, vlatest databases, database name, layout name, script name, and question mark script.param with a URL encoded payload that you're sending. That seems like that's a one command thing. Seems quite easy. The script that we're running, which is one of the things we're going to show, doesn't have to be just contained in that third file. If the data that you send it includes how to get back to where I currently have called you from, then the log file can pull data back from where I am currently sitting. And that's one of the things we're going to kind of demo in a minute, just to make that more real. Big question everybody always kind of focused on, because we all know that there's a limit to the data API beyond which we have to buy some more data. It only measures the data coming out. It doesn't measure data going in. 3 simple calls to get a token, run a script, log off, generated those number of bytes, 640, 504, 540 when run through Postman. That's 1690 bytes. That's what 2 gig allowance looks like. Divide that by, divided 257 by 1684 by 365 by 24 by 60. That's 29 calls an hour. A minute. If you, if you've got a system that's generating an error that needs logging every 2 seconds for every user, every single day of the year, I propose you have a different kind of problem that you should be fixing first. It's a level at which you go, actually, I mean, Wim has pointed this out on several occasions, that these kind of small number of bytes that we're getting back as responses, particularly if we're using a layout that has hardly any fields on it to give us a response, and so we minimize the response coming back. It's not a problem, and if we're doing high level error logging, then probably this isn't the method we should be using, but we shouldn't need to worry about that at all.
Would it handle a huge amount of pressure though? Because one of our systems actually has way more than that. I think maybe more like 10 or 50 records per second all day. A medical system for hundreds of users logged on.
300 some odd users logging.
How many records per day, David? Like 50,000 log records per day?
Yeah, it's tens of thousands every day being logged.
Would this handle that? Because you're solving this. I'm peaked because this would solve a lot of other logging issues that we have.
Well, so the issue is you end up having to do a thing around token management at that point. So you kind of go, have I got a token to be able to do this? Is it still active? Okay, I can reuse the token, so I don't have to keep I don't have to keep starting new sessions. You would kill it if you started generating a very large number of sessions, and that has been demonstrated that it doesn't really work with high levels of kind of hitting for brand new tokens. And you have that whole thing, well, even if you go get a token, log on, get a token, do a thing, log off immediately, if that's happening multiple times, you've still got parallel sessions. And there is a level at which one of the reasons that Louis wrote Node-RED for FileMaker was to solve that problem, because it handles how all of the tokens, because it was a continual generation of tokens that was choking servers and could make them fall over and die.
I'm sorry, what was that that you just said was written to handle that problem?
A Node-RED, and I'm going to demo a little bit of it for you, David, later. Just cool. Node-RED, something that runs on Raspberry Pi, but Louis has written a library for FileMaker. You set up the connection. All it does is you hide away. You don't have to worry about explicitly getting the tokens. It handles whether or not a token can be reused or not invisibly. So it solves that problem ultimately. There are other ways to deal with the problem. Quick slide, which you can look at later. Jesse did a fantastic presentation at DevCon a few years ago using Kinesis, which is, like a fire hose as big as you want, generating hundreds of millions of records in a minute to kind of aggregate them and using their infrastructure. The issue is you pay for everything somewhere. So Amazon, everywhere there's a little red triangle, you've paid a small amount to do that part of the process. And if you use it a lot, then the amount you pay goes up. But in theory, saving all of those records as a gzip file and being able to do a SQL query on that to query your data. But there are alternatives ways for really high level stuff. We're not going to look at that at all. So the question to kind of push out is, how can you therefore transfer a lot of data without eating your data allowance? Well, clue at the bottom, container fields are not counted as part of the data allowance. Why? Because all you get back is a link to the container file, a streaming link. The data isn't sent. You just get a URL link to that container. So if the length of our script parameter arguably is over 30,000 characters, so we know we can't send it, what we could do is create a record in a table. So now we have the text encode function. If you text encode that text, what does that produce? Container data. What's that? A file. So if I send as part of my log a file, a layout, and a record ID, I'll get back for that container a session-based URL that looks something like that. You do also need to be able to pass it the original file name, but I could then, in reverse, do an insert from URL of that container. The container data isn't in any way metered. It's a really, I will show that that works. It's a very clever way to get around any kind of data limits when you want to kind of pass data that's as a result of a query on a table. You can process it and then come back and delete that attachment record so they don't hang around. But there's an interesting concept to consider as well. We also now do have this new endpoint in the data API, which is the validate token. So you get a token, and the problem was in the past, you never knew whether or not it was still valid. So you had to make a call to log out and then get a new token because you weren't sure if the token worked, because if you tried to use the token, it would then fail. You can now validate whether or not the session token is still valid. And you clearly use a small amount of 503 bytes back with a message which is basically full of full of nothing, which I think FileMaker could do a better job of making that payload smaller, to be fair. But you can see whether or not that is valid. If it's not valid, you get a 952 error. The message is invalid data API token. So that's, if you haven't played with that, that's an endpoint to consider working with. If you're still on server 18.0.3, then the tokens expire 15 minutes after creation, regardless of their last use. that behavior was changed in 18.0.4, so they last for 15 minutes after last use. And obviously the question is, well, why aren't we all on FileMaker 19 yet? Because I'm a good citizen of that community. And the data API, obviously, to be able to query something, works on a committed record. So it works on the data that is committed. Obviously, as I think maybe Matt has showed me some of the stuff around this, that execute SQL does or does not work on the committed record, whether you're running it on the server, whether you're running it on the local client. That's one of the ways you can work out if the data in this record has changed before you validate it, is look at what it looks like from a different place. The while function could now grab data from a record to generate the JSON that you want to pass. But the limitation of the while function is if you have a repeating field at all as part of your layout, it will only get the first repetition of the field, which may or may not suit your use case. And obviously, if you're using FileMaker 19 client, we now have the execute data API step, which performs a local data API query, which is not metered, but it's only on any table, any layout in this current file. So it can't query it can't query a related file. So it doesn't work easily if you use data separation, basically. You have to find a way to trigger it in the data file, not in the UI file. So let's go and do some demo stuff. We're going to grab some record, user, and system data, and that's what we're going to log as a parameter. We would log into the log file to grab a token. I'm going to show you executing a script as the endpoint with this token and parameter. That script in the log file generates the new record, but I'm also going to look at doing a callback for that as well. And then at the end of that, what the script would do would log out. So you log in, grab a token, fire off a script by passing it a parameter with the data that you want to store somewhere. That goes off and does that. And then we just log out. So kind of simple. And then the other demo, after showing you how some of those things work, is looking at Node-RED. I'll come back to that presentation file, that slide, just before I do that demo. So let's go to here. Let me just do something else first. So for people who are using Ultralog or something like that, where you're logging within a table in a field, you're logging changes to the file. So I've got 3 fields here that I'm monitoring any changes to. So I would be expecting that, what day is it? Wednesday, that I've just changed 3 fields as we're there. If I click this button here down here, I want to see my change log. And here is an Ultralog style. In fact, it is using Ultralog. But the data that's in that field, I've pushed into a data tables. So this is a web viewer on a card window. Taken the data, put it into data tables, which now means that the things that you can't do with obviously with a static field is sort by any of these things here. I can search within it just for changes that have been made to one specific field. I can search for, although this brings up all of them because it's all been me, all the changes I made. But something else I did was these 3 values here, if I just sort by date, these 3 indicate that these were the initial changes from nothing to first, second, and third. I can remove that from the data just by clicking a button because it's all just a variable with the data in. So I can remove it, so I can just search changes that have been made since the initial setup. So that was something I've been playing with Small change, you have to, one small substitute you have to do from the ultralog output, but this is now, like I say, it's a web viewer running data tables, JavaScript library that gives you all of the stuff that data tables would normally give you. Just thought I'd show you that as a kind of interesting diversion. So let me get those two windows up. So it's a working Scratch thing. It's a log file, okay? And within it, I've got a table for general errors. Tiny bit of, let me just find all records. So I'm doing a tiny bit of color highlighting. So a level 1 error is in red, level 2 error in yellow, the rest don't have a color. If I want to view a specific record, let's go to this one, then this is the raw JSON that was sent as part of the error message. We'll have a look at that in a second. I've got a set of fields here using, this is kind of clever use of the self function, that if the field name is the name of one of the nodes in the JSON, it will auto enter the value from it by using that as the auto enter calc. Leave that up there, so later on when you see the video, you'll be able to copy paste that. But because this is just JSON in a text field, we can view that within a web viewer. So this is literally just a web viewer showing the raw JSON. There's a tiny bit of CSS and one tiny little JavaScript library. That kind of started from Dan's demo file. I've done a few tweaks to it, both in terms of kind of how it works. But this enables us to kind of look through the JSON just in a very simple way to be able to kind of hide things, particularly when if you get to like a level 1 error, you're actually recording quite a lot of stuff. So you do want to be able to kind of hide it. But it's everything from, you know, the window that was open, how many records are open, which plugins are installed, which user it is. You know, it's system state stuff. It's stuff Matt Petrowski would love, you know, in terms of, here's a massive system state that just tells you, as well as some things you're passing it deliberately. You know, the messages are the login failed, but you were on this layout name when it happened, and this is the persistent ID of the machine. So you could search through all of the records in a log file based on the persistent ID or based on something else. Just a very simple bit of, you know, filtering down to do that. So similar look and feel to things that happen using just some, you know, obviously the amount of stuff we might want to record when we're logging mail is different. When we're logging a file, we may want to be logging, again, just, it all looks very similar. We get to the point where what we've got is something that looks and feels the same across all of them. So as a developer, you get used to, okay, how does this look? What am I looking for? To help us kind of analyze what's happening. And in terms of my GDPR thing, what's happened? Somebody's viewed a file, somebody's downloaded a file, somebody's deleted a record, and I wanted to keep some logs of that. So let's just, that's the error file. Let's scroll to the bottom, and then I've literally got within here, I've got some buttons which would just run the script that would generate the fake error with that level. So run the script with 5. You just need to keep an eye on the number at the top. Because
of the Monty Python reference, by the way, that's excellent.
We'll be doing something about it in a second. So let's click, we get a 3 error followed by, oh, and that was how long that took. I should turn that off, and a 4 error and a 5 error. So it's all happening. It's not colliding with each other. And at the bottom, I've just generated a 5, a 3, a 2, a 4, and a 5. So it's kind of happening relatively quickly and invisibly, not performance stress tested to the kind of thing Matt's talking about. And that's generated, there we go, a level 1 error. But if in the case that I want to, where does it go to? This is happening now somewhere else. So the other thing, so let's show this. Here's a piece of text. It happens to be a Monty Python lorem ipsum, fake text you can use. This is a massive long piece of text. And we want to not send that as text as a result of a kind of, it's too long to send as a parameter. We want to send it as a file. So if I run this script, that generates a file, in this case, a text file from this text. So what we have to do, obviously, just to prove that this works, is to export it and automatically open it. And there, in fact, is that text in a file. So that uses the text encode function to generate a file of it. So now, instead of sending this as a parameter, like I say, I can send a parameter that says I'm in this table on this record, or a record with this ID, and there's a file here with all the data that you need. Once you get to the other end, you pull the file over, you can just do a base64 decode, base64 encode of the file to get the raw contents, or export it and use the text, use the file functions. Any other way, it's a way of passing a large amount of data. But while we're here, I'm going to also insert a picture, which happens to be a picture of 2 of my grandchildren dressed up in the most ridiculous costumes. And I'm going to insert this file, a PowerPoint file as well, which is not small, it's about 10 meg. And I think I need to be in this file here. We get to the right place. Okay, so there we go. I'm just going to remove that record. That's not what I wanted to do, because that's the same thing. Let me just do that. And put those back. My mistake.
That's a big file.
It's about, yeah, it's to prove a point, actually. Let's see if I can find that text file again. There we go. That's the text file that I had. If I want to, if I have this record, so let's imagine this is a record of an email transaction that happened. Okay, so what I have is the text of the email that was sent, but I did also send 3 attachments to it. Now, obviously, kind of just going, here's a block of JSON which contains stuff and includes the body of the email text. That's kind of quite simple to do using, you know, the method we just showed. You just kind of go, there you go, here's a parameter, go off, create a record, it creates a log record with that if it's all text. But if I want to create a log record which also contains these files, so that I have a permanent record of the attachments that were sent at the same time, what I'm going to do here is effectively do this thing with a callback. So if I go to open this table a second, okay? So if I run the script that says, okay, I want to create a log record, that also contains multiple attachments. Let's just quickly look. What this script is going to do is it's going to create a record in this in the table, but it's then going to say, okay, this came from here in this table on this layout and this record, and here are the fields that you need to go and grab to be able to pull across into here. So okay, so we have 20 records in here. If I run the log this, it's done, okay? So I now have 21 records. If I go to the 21st record, that's really irritating because demo gods have gone, no, thank you very much. We don't like that. That's irritating. Here's one that did work earlier, kind of thing. I'm going to find out. I'm going to just see if I can put something in there and see if it's to do with that. Right, I apologise. That's a real pain because it did work. Essentially, so it's going off and generating a record, which is just passing me some data, but it also includes what the attachments should be, who the email was sent to. It could contain the body, but like I say, it's then designed to do a callback to this, to go, okay, I know I've got this field with these 3 repetitions and these 3 file names. Could you just, when you do a data API query to this record, what you get back for these containers is streaming links to the containers, so it can then do insert from URL one at a time into the repetitions. So that's kind of a pain that didn't work properly. I apologize for that. I'll see if I can make that work in a minute. So let me just look at, let's get the right files up. That one and that one. So let me quickly look at this slide. We're going to look at very quickly at Node-RED. I asked my, when you're a developer and you're doing that, I'd like to go to work on a Saturday and do something that's interesting, that interests me, to see whether or not it's a technical thing I could solve. I asked the question, is there a way to generate 2 records in 2 completely different files with the same data at exactly the same time? Not one after the other, but at the same time. Okay. And that was an experiment for using Node-RED. So Node-RED looks something like, oh, here's the thing I wrote in Node-RED. It's a tiny dashboard that tells me what the resources are like on my Raspberry Pi and how many people are logged into a Linux server that I'm running as a test server at the moment. Raspberry Pi, Node-RED looks something like this. I'll just stretch that out. Not doing a presentation about Node-RED. Louis has done a really good one at one of the West Coast user groups, but I have a flow that says create flow. When I hit a URL, I'm going to generate a unique ID and a random number, and I'm going to create a record in a file. But this branch here says, oh, at this point, I'm going to, at the same time as I'm doing that, I'm going to go off somewhere else and do something else. And the something else says, could you just go and create a record in a second file? And when we come back, when you hit the data API to create a record, you get back the record ID and the modification ID of the file of the record that you created. So I'm going to get back two simultaneously, which I'm going to join together and give myself as the payload. So we'd be doing that by doing this. So hit this with /create. And what I get back here is, in this file, I have a record ID of 117 with a modification ID of 0. And in this file, I get a record ID of 389. Okay, and so if I hit it again, just refresh, I've now got 118 and 390. That shows you that it's incrementing. We go to FileMaker. These are the two files that it's hitting. Last record ID in this file is 390. Last record ID in this file is 118. If I just go back to Safari, let's make it smaller so you can watch that happening. Do that, do that, do that.
John, I love getting way down in the weeds like this, but we have 20 minutes left, and I want to make sure there's some time for people to have questions on some of the amazing stuff that you've shown in terms of how to do that, because I think a lot of us are not at your level. This is so great, and you've solved so many problems that I didn't know had been solved. Okay. And I'm really dying to get into it. So first, I'll ask one big question: are the files, the slides, and the demo files going to be available?
I can pack it. So yes, the slides are available. I can package up something into a demo file because it's sort of from some of my working files, but I will happily package up some stuff that people want. The Node-RED stuff is easy to package up. But let's just watch this happening. I'm going to refresh this, and on both of those FileMaker files, you are going to see a record being created at the same and it's at the same time. It only looks like it's a different time because the server time is out by about 15 seconds, but the identical record is being created in two places at one time. Why is that useful? So that a serious crisis record is created in the user client log table. It's also created in my separate log file. So when something happens that I always want to be notified in anybody's system, this is a method of creating two at the same time. It's not in production. It's a total. Does it work? Yes, it works. Is it a kind of cool trick? Yes, but it would work. The only, as it were, weak link in the chain is making sure that your man in the middle, which is Raspberry Pi, is kind of up and running. I think I can stop there, Matt, and happy to take a whole bunch of questions based on, I know I've shown a lot of, here you go, in my workshop, opened a toolbox, here's some things that are on the bench. Some of them have turned into pieces in production. Some of them are still things that I'm playing with. Final thing, sorry. Could you use OData to do the same thing as using the data API? Why is that important? Because if you use the data API, you have to go and log on and get a token, do the action, and then log off. You have to manage the tokens. If you use OData, OData is only available at the moment in FileMaker Cloud and on the Linux server, if you have a Linux server running, 19, but it only uses basic authentication. So you don't have any messing about with tokens. There is a new extended privilege called OData that you'll have if you open a file. So you give a user a simple username and password with an OData permissions. So here is a very simple, I'm going to create a record in that error log that I just showed you using Postman by literally doing a simple post. Don't have to worry about any tokens whatsoever. It's done. Let me jump back to the log. It's in the sorry, it's in the error log and it's a 1. Jump to the bottom.
Are people using FileMaker server on Linux yet? We have a couple of them running at AppWorks. Anybody else have them running?
So it's marvelous. So there's the last record. It was created by Postman. I should just run it again from Postman. Send, go back to the log file. There's a second file from, so that's using OData to do the same thing. Very simple. I've got it running from a script from FileMaker because it's a really simple set three variables, do an insert from URL. It does exactly the same thing. In fact, there's the script, add using OData from inside the FileMaker file. There's a record created using OData to do the same thing. Much less overhead. There's some stuff you have to manage around what you get back as the OData response. I'll stop talking. You can ask questions. I'm going to drink gin.
I guess you could actually have a dedicated server running on Linux or on FileMaker Cloud that has OData that's separate from your main database, couldn't you?
Yes, just for the purpose of sucking in all of your logging information.
Huh. And that would be a very inexpensive server because you can build such a tiny Linux server on AWS.
Yes, and also it means you separate your logging. When the main system goes down, you still have your log files to know what happened at the point when that happened. Separation of concerns, good thing. It also means you can aggregate logging files from several different. So if you have a company that has 2 or 3 servers, but you want to log things across the whole system, but you want to aggregate your logging, yes, run a Linux server, run OData to make it happen. That's a total possibility.
There comes a point where it just doesn't make sense to even have FileMaker do any of the logging at all, but I guess you could just change it out at the back end with something else too. But I mean, as much as I love having everything in FileMaker. Well, I don't want to ask all the questions. I want to make space for you guys to comment on this.
Let me stop sharing so you can see me.
I'm going to call on people and make you ask questions because I know you guys have burning questions.
Well, you know, I have a question, but it's not exactly a technical question. It's more of a, I don't know, figuring out why to do something or how. So a big problem I have with logging is deciding when do you want an alert? In other words, John mentioned, like, when do you want to get woken up at 2 in the morning? Because in my experience, I found that they universally don't alert you when you want them to. They either you get too many, and so you have to turn off the noise, or you don't get it when you really wanted it because it missed it, and it always has to do with parameters and triggers, and I don't have a solution to this because I'm kind of frustrated by it, and I'm wondering if anyone has ideas that aren't dependent on a specific system necessarily, because you know, I think mostly we can kind of figure out the nuts and bolts of our own systems, but you know, how do you really define triggers that are meaningful, that are going to alert you when you need them? Because sometimes, you know, just using the level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that doesn't always work. You know, because even you know, as you mentioned, like if the power goes out, well, yeah, I want to know that the power went out. Not, I can't do anything about the power being out. All I can do is notify my users or whoever, stakeholders, you know, the power's out.
But you will need to know that that's happened, because you'll have to go and do data. You'll have to go in and kick in with data recovery or something like that. You may have to, you know, there is potentially still some action that you might have to do as a result of that happening.
Right. Yeah. There'll be action later. You know, the power may come back up in a minute or 2 hours or whatever. Who knows? Yeah. There'll be action. I just find that a lot of times I set up alerts thinking, oh, this makes sense. I want to be told when this happens. And then it either happens 60 times a day. It's like, oh, okay, well, this parameter is not right then. And the end result is I end up having to turn it off so I don't get any alerts. So in other words, I end up with log files and everything is only actionable well after the fact. In other words, when I actually look at the log file and do some searching through it or something. And I'd really like to have some automation that actually does alert someone that something's happening. Or even, I mean, I could even see, of course, now that I'm talking out loud, I'm even thinking it would be interesting, like the HR alerts. Like HR might want to know when a manager, say, downloads a record or is viewing a record or added to a record. Like those would be very low-level alerts, but they would probably like to know because they're not server related. It's, you know, it's not that something's broken. It's just someone acted on something. Those are easier, I guess. I guess I'm really only complaining about sort of server side things where, you know, there's a problem, like it couldn't save some data, couldn't commit a record. There was some error like that. Does anyone have to deal with that issue?
We for sure do.
I mean, yeah.
We log things and track them. And you hit the nail on the head in terms of how to know which things are really important, which ones aren't. And you kind of have to have someone looking at it to determine what the action is. You know, we've got one of the things we're working on right now is there's some weird, I'm not sure if it's a 19.1 or problem or what the nature of it is, but there's a problem that can happen on a server where you know it's going to crash within the hour. But if you take action now and you log users off and close the files, you can prevent the crash. That's obviously super actionable. So, you know, finding out exactly what that trigger is and averting the server crash is super important. But then you also hit, like, you know, what about things like a record can't be committed? Well, we had a script that was running that was causing records to not be able to be committed, and there was thousands of them a month, and they're totally red herrings. So if you had, you know, it wasn't even anything important, even though that actually would seem like a super important thing. So there's a lot of there's a line that's just going to be a human issue, and you have to just sort of look at them. That's not really an answer to your question. I guess I'm just saying, having looked at this carefully, that's what we found.
Yeah, no, that is an answer. I mean, the answer can be that how I've dealt with it, or we've dealt with it at the firm I worked for. Well, that's actually the way most people deal with it. That's fine. It's just sometimes I don't know, like, because unfortunately, when you look online, you often get answers from huge companies with a staff of 100 and thousands of employees or people, or at least thousands of people accessing a system. And like, those don't apply to me. That's not what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with something smaller with 100 people and an IT staff of 2.5.
Right.
That's all I got. So yeah,
we use Zabbix, which is great, and that tracks a lot of that's like a central tracking for all different kinds of errors, and can monitor lots of FileMaker servers and lots of other types of servers, and also can connect to different alert systems, so we can send alerts out through Telegram or something like that.
Oh, great. I actually was thinking on deploying that. I have a way to deploy it easily on an appliance, a network appliance, and I was thinking about doing that.
Yeah, I think we've got a dedicated Zabbix server on AWS.
Right, and that's the other thing. You can deploy it in the cloud as well to run it. Okay, well, that's good to hear too.
So there's just a few minutes left. What other questions that you guys have that are burning on logging?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point about error logging, is that I've found I'm running a system that's been there for like 8 years, and it's the errors that we've never had before are the ones that you really have to action. So you can't actually capture for them because they've never happened before, and they're the critical ones.
That's where you need AI, some kind of fuzzy logic to like, hey, I've never seen that error before. I better flag that one.
Well, you just check the box in FileMaker preferences that says, alert me on errors that have never happened before.
Yeah, no,
But it's not really a question, but it's a comment of a previous employer that had a sizable FileMaker solution. We had a couple different logging systems going all the time, and one of them they were sending out to SQL. I think it was MySQL. In fact, Chris Irvine can probably tell you more about this. He built the system. But in every single script, we started a timer, and we always had one exit point, and we'd all record every script execution and how long it took. And then with some pretty graphs, we could see what scripts are being run and how long is it taking to run them. And so if we're looking to optimize, we can go see this script is taking 1/10 of a second, but it gets run 10,000 times versus a script that takes an hour to run and it gets run once a week. Anyway, the point being, the SQL provided a delayed write option to really reduce workload on the server. I'm sure the data API is probably not the best solution for that level of logging. But I just throw that out there as a comment.
Why not? You think that's just too much data for the data API to handle?
Well, it depends on the number of users. I mean, we're talking about every single script. A solution with 20,000 scripts and 100 users, that's an awful lot. I wonder if you probably could do it with the data API, but I wonder if there are efficiencies to be gained by locally collecting byte size or log records, and then once a minute you fire that off to actually record that in your standard.
Yeah, I think tuning the whole logging setup so that you have the lightest possible weight, and so that logging itself isn't actually what causes the system to have performance problems. And that means calculating what you're going to be logging at the client end, having the communication issue be as small as you can for sending the log data, and then having the actual writing of the log as clean as possible. John, I think what you've shown is definitely on the very I would say like on the verbose end for the possibility, way more so than you could get with just logging on a trigger. I was hoping you'd actually show some of the schema change logging, which I didn't see yet, but maybe we can talk about that later. On some of the other things you talked about would be things I really would want to do.
Yeah, the quick one on that is every time you close a file on your last window close, you could save a copy as XML, but also do something with putting that somewhere as part of the saving as XML. So every time you close a file, you are doing your own kind of Git repository thing where you're saying, here's the XML file. So that takes a bit of time, but then using FM comparison or something like that, you can go, here's the version that I closed this at 10 o'clock. I also logged back in at 11 o'clock and did some more work, but I closed it at 12. So here's the 10 o'clock and the 12 o'clock and the 3 o'clock version. So every time so we can record now schema changes it's not lightweight, but it is absolutely possible that you can build that into the process. So every time you, particularly when you're developing, every time you close a file, just save a copy as XML automatically. And then FM comparison will do that for you.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but that totally makes sense. Other questions people have or comments before we wrap?
Just one last thought is the level of logging in I guess you'd call it a semi-vertical solution, where centralized logging for the critical errors across all your clients, and they're all coming into one custom solution. Say, hey, looks like version 3.1, we introduced a problem, and we can go dig on that. So that's just again a comment of the data API providing a common log location.
Right.
I just think it's important to mention the wonderful bypass of the data API limit we were introduced to today using containers. That's just lovely.
Any other comments on this session or anything else going on in the FileMaker world, or which state capitals are being invaded right this minute, which you should definitely go look at the news after this ends, because the count is 3 right now.
Wait, 3 state capitals?
Yes,
Yeah.
Kansas and Utah, and of course the U.S. Capitol is actually currently not occupied by politicians.
Wow. Yeah, I've been
Look
sort
at
of
the
watching the
news.
news on the side here a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
We're cuckoo. We're a bunch of cuckoos here in the United States.
It's really true. And I feel we've
Yeah,
got people on from Australia and England.
as an outsider, this is a great reason why we have Zoom meetings now. We don't have to come over there.
It's true. What we
Because we probably won't get back home again.
Can we come over there? That's the question.
Right.
Yeah, well, you can. You just got to quarantine for 2 weeks. And yeah, we're down to 1 case here in my state and 3 cases in another. So we've got 4 cases yesterday for the whole country.
There's more cases than that in the building I live in.
Yeah, but do you have freedom?
We're going to get into politics pretty quickly. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
This has been.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about the logging.
Yeah.
John's presentation, I have seen this one before, and it does start getting you to think about, okay, what can I log, and what can I then put that log into practice for my managers to see? I have an iPad system where it's offline, and they need to refresh their data regularly. Now, a lot of the users are very lax in when they refresh, but they're pretty quick to ring up and say, I don't have the latest data on my iPad, what's going on? My managers go to the admin table, say, well, hang on, mate, you haven't refreshed your data for 3 weeks. See that big red refresh button on the right-hand side to say there's new data on the server? Go and press that. Right, I can see that you've refreshed right now. You'll have the latest data. Next time, press the big red button. And so it becomes a tool for your user managers for being able to keep up to date with what people are doing and, more importantly, not doing.
I like it.
Yeah, you know what ties into that one? That just gave me the idea of also the feature that came in FileMaker. I can't remember which version that tracks local errors on the local person's computer in their data folder, in their, I don't know exactly where it goes inside FileMaker. When they're running a script and doing different things on all the databases they have open, there's actually a possibility to take that file and upload it to a database when they close out of FileMaker, for example, and then overwrite and clear that file out. Yeah, one other possibility to add to the myriad of things we can do.
Yeah, it's the set error logging script step.
That's the one.
Which creates a file, but because you know where the file is, like you say, absolutely, when you close out, you can go and find that file and upload it to somewhere. So you've got today's set of logging. If you then delete it, the next time FileMaker starts, it will just start writing afresh in the new one. Otherwise, it appends. So very useful.
I really love logging, and I've thought about it a lot. And my mind, I should have been wearing a hat to contain the explosion that went off in my brain watching all this, because this was really great. Thank you so much, John, for coming to share this with us.
Thank you very much. It's great to have a chance. You know, I love coming to the States for my yearly trip, my yearly road trip. So I did miss the whole Engage not happening. It was great virtually, and I love some things about it, but it's not the same as meeting some of you in person and sitting and chewing the cud and having these kind of conversations over a coffee, saying, I've been thinking about this, what do you think? Mm-hmm. You know, because that's where the stimulus comes for new ideas and new things to explore. So thank you for the chance.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Matt's got my contact details. If anybody wants to email direct with a specific question, I'll let you have the slide deck. I'll parcel up some of the kind of working pieces into a demo file that you can then play with and see how I've done what I've done. See what I mean?
And we'll put a link to the demo file on the Meetup page as a comment to this Meetup, so people can find it.
Great.
All right, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, John.
Cheers.